This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Street photography is like jazz. It's a lot of improvisation. The rhythm and the flow, it's unpredictable, but it is captivating. And I think my favorite way to experience this is 28mm. Last weekend, I picked up this 28mm Elmer from Leica. And I'll talk more about this lens specifically later on, but I wanted to talk more about the focal length as a whole and how I think it's affected my photography. See this conversation as we're sat in a coffee shop, photographer to photographer, just chatting through ideas. I might say some stuff you completely disagree with, but I think that's cool. The imperfections of a 28mm leave more room for context. It's more raw and real, a snapshot of life as it happened. And when I use the word imperfections, these are details that wasn't intentional. They were there anyway, so something on the floor, a hand in the bottom right corner, maybe a branch in the top left corner, or half of someone's face kind of on the edge of the frame. Just things that you couldn't avoid because you are shooting 28mm, and therefore the composition isn't perfect. And on the other hand, you might also capture a frame that has zero imperfections. In fact, the composition is clean and you've pretty much nailed it. That's fine as well. But altogether, imperfections or zero imperfections, seeing a scene come together through a 28mm lens just feels something, and I'm gonna try and explain that something in this video. Sometimes with a 35mm or tighter lens, the scene can actually look perfect, but also predictable. They're composed with a higher degree of intention, and therefore result in images that might technically be superior, i.e. the perfect composition, but lack that spontaneity and energy that makes a photograph feel alive. I realize every photograph, especially street or documentary style work, is very unique, shaped by its circumstance and not solely the focal length. And you might be sat here listening to my reasoning in this video thinking, I've seen loads of photographs that don't align with what I'm saying. I get it, but I'm just trying to express some thoughts, and this is quite difficult to articulate. And this is my channel, so I get to say whatever I want. Documentary and street photography style work delivers a vast range of images. And what I'm expressing here isn't a hard and fast rule, rather just how these focal lengths make me feel when I use them. And lately, and perhaps the main reason for me buying a new 28mm lens, I've been gravitating towards work that doesn't feel so perfect and clinical. And I'm reminded of this idea of avoiding perfect and clinical photographs every time, well, recently, every time I go to crop my images. And this isn't going to be a segment on why you shouldn't crop your images. Do whatever you want with your photographs. I still crop my images in attempts to achieve a better photograph. Do what you want, of course. However, recently, when I use the crop tool in Lightroom, I find myself trying to achieve the perfect composition by trying to fix the image because something was wonky, or I'm trying to remove a distraction, or I'm just avoiding something in frame. That seems to be the reason for me cropping my work. But I'm thinking, is that me now not embracing what actually happened? And the times recently when I don't crop my images, even if there are imperfections in the frame, I'm kind of starting to embrace them. If an image is too symmetrical and perfectly composed and free of distractions, does it then just look pretty robotic, and does it almost become void of the human touch? This conversation is also heavily targeted towards documentary and street style stuff. I'm not talking abstract or fine art photography because I think everything I'm saying here is pretty much nonsense if you're thinking about that style of work. If the moment is great, it doesn't matter what focal length it's taken on. I do think that as well. And 35mm is one of my favorite focal lengths. But I think that's because I was trying to achieve perfect compositions and distraction-free images. And I think you can do that with a 35mm. With a 28mm, you can't really get away with it because those imperfections and distractions creep in. You just can't get away with as much with a 28mm photograph. So when it's done well, I think it really works. Before we carry on with this video, I'd just like to take a moment and share with you today's sponsor, Squarespace. I have recently just come back from a trip to Lake Garda, and I've posted all of my Lake Garda work on a specific page over on my website. You can check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. Setting up that page was an absolute breeze. I've been using Squarespace for years, way before they even became sponsors of this channel, to host my photography portfolio. Since then, I've used Squarespace to write weekly blogs, sell digital products, and also sell physical products. So if you're interested in selling prints or you're interested in selling presets of your own, if you wanted to take your photography to the next level, I cannot recommend Squarespace enough. And don't worry, because if you're sat there thinking setting up a website is super complicated, it really is not, and Squarespace can handle all of the heavy lifting for you. With hundreds of beautiful templates to choose from, designing a space that feels like yours has never been easier. I also want to mention I write a weekly newsletter called The Focal Point, much more behind the scenes, personal. If I'm sharing anything new or sharing more photographs, it all goes on the Focal Point newsletter first, and I send those out every week. Once again, setting that up with Squarespace was so easy to do. So if you wanted to start a newsletter or you wanted to write blogs or anything else I've mentioned, post your portfolio of work, sell things online, Squarespace has got to be your go-to. So why not at least start a free trial and see what you think? When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/MikeChudley to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for the continued support. Now let's get back to my ramblings about 28mm. Here's a recent favorite image of mine from New York City. I love the two subjects in the center. They were the reason I took the photograph. The flip phone from one woman and pure boredom from the other was interesting to me. But what I didn't expect to capture was the rush of people around them. The woman who looks bored contrasts even more so with the energy around her. And by no means am I saying this image is amazing, it's just an example for this video. I would have once considered that photograph as distracting. I don't like the background, I don't like everything else that's going on in the frame, but now I'm leaning towards the idea that that's actually what it looked like. That was the streets of New York, and that's what it felt like to me taking the photograph. So the two subjects in the middle of the photograph, cool, but the whole image together with the rush of people around them, I think it makes it better. By the way, I think this is worth mentioning. I am not suggesting here that any old rubbish we capture through a 28mm lens is going to be interesting just because it feels more authentic. No, I'm not throwing out the rulebook here. What's actually happening in the photograph needs to be somewhat interesting to someone for it to be considered a good photograph. However, I'm just leaning towards work that feels more free-flowing and c'est la vie. When I see a really nice 28mm photograph, I think it just presents more of a realistic point of view. One that's not about achieving perfect aesthetics, but about what's documenting real life. This next thought might be a slight tangent, but I want to make the comparison with this whole conversation to street skateboarding and Olympic street skateboarding. The magic in street skateboarding is in the nuances. So a skater ollies up a curb, has to brush past security, has to make an awkward turn or push around the corner, then clears the stair set, does the trick, they land and their hat falls off in the wind. All of that shows the effort and the style and the risk and the energy of achieving the trick. Now take the skateboarder and place them in the perfect environment, the Olympic street skate park. The outcome is almost certain now, and the focus is just on the tricks. Things are a little bit more predictable. The goal is to do the trick down the stair set and we score it. Cool. The tricks are still the same. The tricks are still as impressive, if not more impressive, in the Olympics. It's amazing. However, the magic of what made the street skating special is lost because you're now in the perfect environment. Hopefully that makes sense. Similarly, a great street photography moment captured on any lens is still a great street photography moment. But the way it's presented and the way it's displayed makes all the difference. And for me, I think a 28mm just feels more lifelike. I find it's less about perfection and more about how the moment felt. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed all of that waffle. Let's now get into why I bought this 28mm Elmeret. At the start of the year, when I bought the M11P, I actually bought the Summilux, the 35 Summilux to go with it. And I've said this before, and you might have guessed from my thoughts in this video, but with a 35, I find it easier to come away with usable images. Images I would once classify as distraction free. I just think the 35mm is a great everyday look. So I've been happy with this. However, do I need 1.4? Probably not. I mean, I don't think anyone needs it, but yeah, anyway. This is a great lens, I've been loving it. A few months into owning the M11P, THIPOC or THIPOC, I don't know if it's THIPOC or THIPOC. THIPOC reached out and said, we're releasing some new lenses. Do you want to send, or do you want a 28mm in return for a YouTube video? I made a review about this lens. You can go and check that out. Anyway, fast forward months of using this. It is fantastic, I love it. The only thing that holds it back is its size. It's not exactly small. And if we compare it to the Summilux, it's similar. Yeah, this THIPOC lens is also 1.4. Do I need that? Probably not. Whatever, this lens is fantastic. I really do think this is great. However, a few months ago, I was sent a 40mm lens. This 40mm lens was for the Leica CL in the 1970s. I made a video about it. And this 40mm lens, which I no longer own, I passed it on to someone else, is almost the size of this 28mm Elmra, or pretty much is exactly the same size. It's tiny. And when I was using that 40mm lens, it became glaringly obvious to me that it wasn't the 40mm that I loved, but the size and the weight that I loved about it. And then I thought, why don't I just get something equally small and similar in size and weight? And I think I've landed on it. Combine that with my thoughts about the 28mm and the fact that I've been liking that style of work more and more. Last weekend, I went into the Leica store, pulled the plug and purchased this. And then we lived happily ever after. On a serious note, I've only used this lens for the last week, so I don't really have enough photographs to show you or even give you a review of this lens, but I've only heard good things, and first impressions so far, I can see this quickly becoming my most used setup. I also want to thank a lot of you guys who sent me your favorite 28mm photographs, and I have featured them throughout this video. Thank you for hearing me waffle on about 28mm lens, and also thank you to you guys for sending in your amazing work. And I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.